Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is now time to begin today's webinar. My name is Eric Richard, and I'm the Industry Relations Coordinator at IDDBA. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As with all of our webinars, if you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A button on your screen, and we'll attempt to answer as many as we can following the presentation. Also, the report that we are reviewing today is accessible now on the IDDBA website, and I'll share the link via chat once we begin the presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Jonna Parker. Jonna leads the IRI Fresh Center of Excellence team, focused on the unique needs of the fresh foods departments, including deli and bakery, as well as fresh produce, meat, and floral. She has been passionate about understanding consumers and sales trends in the fresh food space for nearly 2 decades, from a dozen-plus years with the Perishables Group, as well as a global bakery and deli supplier, and now for several years at IRI. Jonna, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Eric, so much for having me back. It is just me today. Anne Marie Rorink sends her regards, but is unable to join us this morning. So thank you all for another month of looking at dairy, deli, bakery trends. So I'll go ahead and get started. I just want to check first, Eric, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, excellent. All right. So to kick things off, this month of June 2021 was definitely one that we were keen to look at because, as you likely well remember, June of 2020 was kind of that breaking point last summer, the tipping point, I should say. We'd been in lockdown in much of the country through April, May, and most of June, and June is when things started to open up a bit. But now that we've lapped those sales and we're in 2021, as all of you know, and hopefully are taking part in healthfully, the lack of the concern around COVID-19, at least as we're measuring it, has dropped. Only 22% of the shopping population is extremely concerned about COVID-19 these days. That has obviously waned greatly from where we were last year. And really what that's translating into is more mobility. And as that relates to shopping and the retail industry, we're still seeing now actually a 6% increase as of the week of June 27th this year. We saw 6% more trips to any retail food store than we saw last year. Basket size is also down about 5%. Because what happens when you can go to more stores is you don't spend that much in any one of them. And I think that really favors dairy, deli, bakery in some ways, and also is a bit of a interesting thing to analyze in other ways. The other big question that we got and that we're really monitoring very closely here at IRI is how the US is returning to food service. And yes, while the majority, 8 out of 10 Americans, have now purchased restaurant food, with a little bit less than about half or so, looking at doing in-restaurant dining or outdoor restaurant dining. I think that what's important to keep in mind, and is not quoted here, but I quoted in some of my other pieces, is that people aren't returning to restaurants as frequently as they were pre-pandemic. What I mean by that is pre-pandemic, 2019, let's say, the average American food dollar was split almost evenly between food bought out of home and food made and bought for in-home consumption. We're still seeing about 80% of food dollars in a consumer's total wallet spent in in-home food preparation and in-home dining. So food service is back. Certainly, we're seeing people enjoy this mobility and go out more, but it still doesn't lead immediately to a swing of the pendulum back to spending a huge amount of sales outside the home. That does favor dairy, as Jeremy said in the report. It favors any of the categories in these spaces that are about meal making at home, especially as you'll see in a minute, as it relates to breakfast and lunch. Why breakfast and lunch continue to be ridiculously important to American consumers is this summer, we're still seeing less than half of the office-going workers actually commute to an office location. We expect that to likely change this fall, but as many of you have likely heard, and maybe are even enjoying yourself, American offices have not fully opened, and many are actually diverting to a hybrid mentality instead of 5 days a week in the office. That means more mornings at home, i.e., more coffee, more breakfasts, and also more lunches at home, which, as you'll see in a minute, has been huge for the cheese and deli meat industry. Overall, in perishables, not like we didn't expect this, but we saw only flatness versus June 2020. So total perishables, which is meat, produce, dairy, i.e. refrigerated, deli, bakery, and seafood, as I'm showing on my screen, relatively sales were flat. $24 billion. We actually gained a little bit of total store share for perishables, about by a half tenth of a point. And what was the real story again is versus 2020, some categories actually increased, most notably deli. And I want to hit this here because I've already fielded 2 calls since this report came out this week. Everyone's going, how on earth is the total store flat and deli up? I'll talk about this at the category level, but the top line is delis were not shopped as much last year. For those of you in the industry, you remember this, especially in the Northeast, which sells a lot of deli volume. Many service counters were still closed. The majority of deli prepared offerings were half the number of items carried or less than previously. And as I just mentioned, when we were in lockdown, we weren't going to the store as much, we weren't on the go as much. So deli food, especially deli prepared, was not as much in demand. If you have a low 2020, it's easy in 2021 to grow. But I think the big thing, as Anna Marie talked about last month, we are always going to be putting gains versus 2019 on these charts. That's the metric to take a look at if you really want to understand consumer trend. And what you see is huge increases in fresh. We're still at a 14% elevated demand over pre-pandemic June. We also, again, the longer tail is we are still buying a lot more meat, a lot more produce, and seafood is in the mix in American plates. The key takeaway for this industry about seafood is how do our deli categories and dairy and cheese and bakery even, the fact that fish is more often on the plate, how do we pair with fish? We've really changed our diet habits as a society, and healthfulness is a top line trend now, even more important in 2021. Consider that as you're thinking about innovation. All right, let's jump into dairy. Dairy was almost $30 billion in the first half of 2021. And again, 2020 was an all-time high in terms of sales levels. So we didn't expect dairy June 2021 sales to eclipse that really strong demand, almost pre-normal type of demand that we saw in June 2020. But the real story again is when we look versus 2019. Every week of June 2021 was well outpacing pre-pandemic June sales for dairy. When we drop into the by category rates of change, again, look across that far right column. Huge growth, except in cottage cheese, for all of our dairy categories. Look at natural cheese for one example. In June 2021, we were selling 14% more natural cheese dollars than previous. And that is just dairy natural cheese. Again, this is utilizing our integrated fresh database. These are known dairy merchandise brands. It includes shreds, snack, chunks, all of the cheese category there, but no deli cheese there. Huge growth, almost $1 billion, $750 million category just in June. Other notable increases, take a look at cream and creamers. This morning coffee at home routine is key. I also know, and we're hearing anecdotally, people are increasingly stocking cream and creamers to make at home desserts, at home sauces. Americans are much more confident cooks now. And the cream and creamers category is everything from elevated premium coffees to ingredient use, and high quality, in demand brands really have a great hero story right now in the store. Moving on from dairy, important to take a look also, of course, not just at dollar gains, which can be, as I mentioned, premiumization, but also unit gains. And again, when we compare June 2021 to the ridiculously high amounts of sales happening in June 2020, no big surprise, less units sold. So we are still seeing increased sizes and premium options being what's driving those dollar increases where we saw them in June 2021. Important, though, to note in categories like yogurt, we are seeing volume gains, even if we're not selling as many units. Again, snacks, meals, breakfast taken in the home favors larger serving sizes, as we've been talking about every month of the pandemic. I also think it's fantastic to see cheese snack kits. Now, these are the snacking kits that have cheese as their main component, but no meat. And those are up 2.7% in volume, but down in dollars and units. Well, why? Because people are buying these in bulk now. They're keeping them in their fridges to have as a refreshing snack at home, which means they need more quantity, not necessarily more frequency. So it's hard to look at a category like that, see some negatives, and think it's all down. There is still a lot of demand in a category like that. You really need to look at all the measures to tell the story. All right, let's talk about deli. Again, so often this week, I've been talking with people about declines over June 2020, but we are up, up, up in deli when it comes to this year. I have heard people banter around the phrase of deli resurgence, and I want to caution that headline, and here's why. June 2020 did not see the deli offerings as had been typical. When we had less offerings, it's hard to say that something made some kind of a comeback or a resurgence from a consumer demand standpoint because people can't buy what's not available. Last year, a multitude of factors caused delis to have low sales. Less traffic in the store, people not nearly as mobile, not taking meals outside the home or not really running in for milk, butter, eggs, tonight's dinner, so you picked up a sandwich or a slice of pizza on your lunch break. And most importantly, as many of you know, we saw staffing shortages. And we saw staff diverted to parts of the store that were in demand, like toilet paper and ground beef, so they weren't making the deli items. When we look, though, versus deli this June, first half, I should say, Jan through June 2021, versus 2019, here is the hero story. Overall in deli, we're up 11% versus this first half of 2021 versus 2 years ago. Look at that cheese number. Deli cheese is selling 21% more dollars than it was 2 years ago. This is known deli brands, both fixed and random weight. Deli meat up 16% versus 2 years ago. These categories, which cost more price per pound than their brethren in other parts of the store, truly showcase Americans' premium, quality, and choiceful, fresh interactions. And that's the hero story here. So again, as you look at each of the weeks in June versus 2019, we're still seeing growth, but really, since 2020 was closed, we're not seeing juggernaut growth. And I think that's what's important to keep in mind. I'll talk about that when we get to the category level, because I think it's where you really see it. Overall, on a month by month period and a quarter by quarter of last year, you see that that deli prepared piece was in the negative, now flipped to the positive. Really, these trend lines are a good visual of what I was just saying. It's tough to look at the back half of 2020 and not take into account that just demand for everything was above, but except for deli prepared. All right, let's talk about deli meat. Again, both dollars and volume up year over year. So that's huge. Even though we saw really high numbers across the store in June 2020, June 2021 is even higher in deli meat. And certainly when we go longer tail, we're selling 6% more pounds of deli meat in June 2021 than we saw even in 2019. Lunch meat in the deli is in demand. When we take a look at the forms, and again, this is one of my favorite innovations of our integrated fresh piece, it's such a huge part of the deli meat story. It is about convenience right now. Consumers like fresh deli, especially they enjoy fresh deli more than when you take a look at versus the packaged meat department lunch meat that excludes deli, which is still up. But take a look at how much more the deli meat is up comparatively when you consider grab and go. Grab and go, as we've talked about before, is when someone does not wait in line at the service counter, but they're still buying by the pound, fresh deli meat. Lots of innovation in packages happening in grab and go. Yes, I do know that some of them are made to look like they were sliced in store, but they are actually outside the store. But if it's sold by the pound and notes that you didn't have to wait in line and slice to order, we call that grab and go. And you see that's up 12% year over year, 83% versus 2019. We're also seeing extreme growth versus 2019 in deli pre-sliced meat. That is fixed weight, pre-packaged, but by known deli merchandised brands. Again, that great research that IDDBA funded to help us identify which of these deli meat items are merchandised in the deli versus which are commonly in the meat department. That really shows that even though, again, deli meat is typically even double the price per pound of packaged lunch meat, consumers are voting with their dollar at these at home meal occasions to choose the deli. Great story for premiumization. Deli cheese, another extremely strong story. Deli cheese, fixed and random weight, known deli brands, flat June versus 2020, but up significantly versus June 2019. And to keep moving, I think again, the story is really in the what we call the forms or the areas of deli cheese. So just to reorient you on the terminology here for deli cheese, known deli brands, not dairy brands, but we have four different types. Grab and go is by the pound slices, but not wait in line service counter. 33% growth versus 2019. Not up as much as deli meat. And I think that's a really interesting insight. Cheese is offered next to grab and go deli meat. Grab and go deli cheese from known cheese deli brands is there. But for whatever reason, while we're still seeing people buy it, there could be maybe more incentives to say if you're picking up grab and go deli lunch meat, why aren't you also picking up grab and go deli cheese? Seems that there's a bit of shopper behavior that's happening where they're still choosing a pre-pack, maybe even a dairy cheese, and that's an opportunity if you're in the grab and go deli meat to incent folks to also get your grab and go deli cheese. Pre sliced cheese also up. Again, I think this is one of the most interesting insights because these are known deli brands in UPC packages. If you take a package out of the store, people don't know if it's dairy or deli, to be honest, because these are almost identical. The only thing different is the brand. And it's so interesting that based on their adjacency to deli and the premium brands offered there, people are voting with their dollar versus the dairy sliced case. Service is down. People are not waiting in line at that counter as much. I know from past research, and definitely now that we're seeing trips up, but maybe not still the amount of time in store as we saw pre pandemic, people don't want to wait in line. They do sometimes. There's certainly a contingent of service buyers that are not going away. The deli will never be 100% grab and go. But I think it's important to note that grab and go is a symbiotic relationship, not a cannibalistic relationship. And then specialty cheese. Specialty cheese is the universe of every other type of cheese sold in the deli. So that's chunks, that's shreds, that's grated, and it's certainly a big part of charcuterie board and snacking. 22% more sales than 2019. We mentioned earlier, one of the top things is that people are happy to celebrate with friends and family again. Cheese platters and boards in the deli, huge opportunity. So let's talk about deli prep. Get a lot of questions on this. Very, very hot topic. Deli prep is roughly 50% of all deli sales. We talk about it in the context of deli entertaining, which are your holiday meals, your spreads, your trays. Spreads are things like hummus and dips. And then we have your deli prepared foods, which are everything else sold in deli that's not a meat and cheese. Again, really interesting trends here. Remember, holiday meals are small. We're only talking about $23,000. So when you see 600% growth year over year, keep that in mind. But that's when it's a catering ring. And I really think this year, embracing celebrations and being there for the consumer as they return to this new normal and want to celebrate with friends and family, delis have a tremendous opportunity there. So whether it's trays or catering, saying, we're here for you and we'll make it easy because, right, when you order from your deli for your grocery store catering option, you can also pick up all the other things you need for your party. Huge opportunity there. And as you're planning this upcoming holiday season, really making it easy for the consumer to get everything that they need from a platter of fried chicken to milk, butter, and eggs, that is a great total store opportunity. Deli prep did extremely well, again, versus 2020, because we were closed last year. I want to keep emphasizing that. But we're still up 9% over 2019. But look at the differences. I love this column, it's my favorite. There are negatives here. Prepared meats, which is a huge part of the category, right? That's where you have your fully cooked meat driven by chicken, rotisserie and fried. We are not buying as much of that as a society as we did in 2019. But we are buying a heck of a lot more entrees where we have a center of plate protein, a side dish, or it's a fully formed meal like a chicken parmesan. That type of entree from the deli is up 26% versus 2019. I've talked about this a bunch. I definitely think there's a health trend and a new way and pattern that we're eating emerging from the pandemic. I talked earlier about seafood. We've talked in past calls about plant forward meals, healthful minded meals. Deli has a huge opportunity here in entrees and could grow even farther, even faster in light of this. Breakfast in the deli still up. We're seeing a lot of retailers have heat and eat refrigerated breakfast options. We're eating more breakfast at home. This fall, we're going to eat more breakfast on the go, but not necessarily want to spend that money out of the home because it's cheaper to get food at home. So, deli breakfast, especially refrigerated heat and eat or eat on the go, excellent opportunity, continues to be a strong piece. Still only $29 million though. Last but not least, side dishes, side dishes, side dishes. We talk about this with our meat friends in the meat department. People are taking the time and they're much more confident cooks, but they might not want to make every single piece of the meal from scratch. Fresh, prepared side dishes that pair well with center of plates, excellent opportunity. We're also hearing and seeing that flexitarians and plant based folks who are avoiding meat are looking at side dishes as the entree. There are now steak restaurants that instead of you getting, you can buy 3 or 4 of their sides as a combo meal. I think that's a huge opportunity for the deli. Last but not least, my personal favorite department, the bakery. Definitely that full circle tale of two cities we've been talking about all along. We know in 2020, the aisle bakery, so that's your packaged goods that are sold adjacent to the perimeter, that was up big time, and it's a $4 billion category in the first half of the year. This year, dollar gains versus 2020 would have been impossible to lap, but we're only down 2%. So again, tale of two cities, because as we get in here, you'll see that versus 2019, oh, it's hypo. Surprised we didn't catch that. How funny to see it big screen. Let me fix that real quick. But, again, we're seeing dollar gains up across total bakery, which is aisle plus perimeter for 20 versus 2020. And a lot of that is driven by strength in the perimeter. As we're gathering more, perimeter bakery is now serving as that destination place, maybe not for a 600 person or even a 100 person gathering, but for a 10 to 20 person gathering. Bakery solutions that are fresh, high quality, and you're proud to bring to that family gathering, that Sunday dinner that you haven't had in forever. All of that is very much in demand and favors that perimeter bakery. But hey, aisle bakery is doing well too. Only being down 1% off of the insanity that was the sales of 2020 still shows that at home eating is causing bread, rolls, and some of our everyday morning goods to be highly elevated. This chart's a bit of a confusing piece here in center stores. Let me explain it. The line is versus the year prior, whereas the shapes show where those sales were ranking versus 2 years ago, that 2019 for that same time period. Bakery sales are extremely elevated, even if we didn't lap the fantastic sales of 2020. Let's get into the by category because that's where all the magic and detail is. Buns and rolls and breads are down versus 2020, but who cares? Because we were selling like hotcakes last year, literally, because we're still highly up, especially in buns and rolls versus 2019. And these are center store baked goods. Again, it's the summer of barbecues and small gatherings, and buns and rolls and things that you can serve are in demand. Snack cakes are still highly elevated too. We are snacking, we're indulging occasionally, we're looking for pre-portion size pieces. All of that favors a lot of demand. You see a lot of breakfast items here way up versus 2019. People are buying baked goods, even though we're going out more to restaurants. We're still eating, again, 80% of meals in the home, and we still want treats and indulgences in the home, and that favors center store. Perimeter is all about opportunity to connect with the delighting every day and the delighting at small gatherings. And again, versus 2019, we're up, but only slightly. And certainly we're up versus 2020, especially in desserts. But remember, what was really exciting in April, May, and June this year is we could get together again with friends and family. So as we hit Easter, as we hit Mother's Day, graduation, you were going and gathering and having options that favored those holidays in your grab and go perimeter bakery were very much in demand. At a category level, I'm going to focus here on that 2019 far right column. And again, you see some really strong numbers, especially in morning goods like muffins, pastry, Danish coffee cakes. I just want to keep emphasizing this, can't say it enough. Taking breakfast from in home is a huge opportunity. And even though these items in the perimeter bakery cost more than their center store frozen or ambient cousins or refrigerated cousins, they are still cheaper than going to Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, or your local coffee shop. Huge opportunity to continue to connect, not just with the folks who maybe bought your Danishes pre pandemic, but what about tapping into the flavors, varieties, and trends that you're seeing in the coffee shop space, which are often very different than the flavors and types we see in traditional perimeter bakery. I think we can capture even more sales in the 2020s if we take a look at some of the flavors, sizes, and trends and bring some of that feel good feeling versus the traditional flavors we've had in perimeter bakery in the past. And I just want to keep calling attention. I don't think we talk enough about brownie squares and bars. Major retailers in this country have done a tremendous job in bringing in bars, squares, and even decadent brownie options, some that really aim toward, again, a snackable size, a sweet, small indulgence. Barney squares and bars do a nice job of that. Also, we're seeing a lot of starting to bubble up in the healthful space. Protein bars and other bar typed snacks are a huge part of the health foods industry in other aisles. We hadn't really seen it in perimeter bakery. We're starting to see it now. And the big key takeaway is if you have those items, don't just rely on putting them on shelf and that your traditional bakery consumer is going to find them. Really consider digitally marketing and talking to the consumers who are in those other aisles, like protein bars, about what you have in fresh. And that could bring them over there. So, bottom line is what's next? Ultimately, again, we're still seeing a lot of meals made in the home. We're also still seeing a concern about food pricing. I want to caution that comment because deli and bakery and even dairy are seeing premiumization happening because consumers view at home dining or making something at home and taking it with you is still cheaper than eating out at a restaurant. Because of this, don't fear premium items in your aisles. Don't just consider what it cost versus a year ago. Consider what it costs versus similar items in your store and outside your store. That's really what the consumer views, not necessarily looking at 5 or 6 years of trend back. A lot of times these items are not everyday purchases. So they're really comparing them to things like what does a coffee cake cost at Starbucks? Or gosh, if I buy a creamer that's maybe $6 at home, I can still make 18 cups of coffee on it versus paying $4 for a cup of coffee out at the coffee shop. We're also expecting back to school to be a big period here. This year's going to be tough for American parents and college students because we weren't really in full time in person last spring. People are going to be anxious about how do I make and get meals on the table now that we're going to school, we're going to the office. Huge opportunity for Dairy-Deli-Bakery there, I think, to fill in that mindfulness to say, hey, we're here for you. We can help you still make high quality meals at home or that you can grab on the go. I'd love to see some back to school messaging about the deli, the bakery, and even the dairy department being here for you. I definitely think that's what the American society needs right now. So with that, we're at the half-hour mark. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions, comments, anything we want to talk about here on this month's report. Eric, has anything come in on the chat?
Yes, we received two questions via chat.
Great.
First question, are club sales included in the prepared meats dollars?
Love the question. Easy answer, yes and no. Yes, I'm joking about saying yes and no. Included in their sales are all of the club channel except for Costco. Costco does not share their data with anyone. We do have a program at IRI with Costco for their vendors, but we are not allowed to include it into our numbers that you see here. Anecdotally, I could tell you that club store and club channel in our consumer purchasing data, club has made a huge impact in all categories. In every one of the departments that I track, whether it be deli, dairy, bakery, but also produce, seafood, and meat, club, including Costco in our household purchasing data, now commands at least 1% more market share than pre-pandemic. So whether it's talking about deli prepared or talking even about just raw meat, club is a formidable channel to go up against. I do think though, this is absolutely anecdotal and it is based on our panel data because again, Costco keeps their data under lock and key. So only those suppliers of their deli prepared meats really know the story. While overall purchasing at club is up, I don't think having a hot chicken is as important as it was pre-pandemic. We're spending more time at home, we're more used to cooking, so that hot chicken, not necessarily the same impact as it had several years ago. That's the key takeaway here, not necessarily that, I'll just use the exact phrase, that Costco's stealing all those rotisserie chicken sales. Just keep that in mind. We eat a heck of a lot more for center of plate and for that dinner or lunch occasion than hot chicken. So I think it's more about variety seeking than it is about, all the rotisserie sales are going to Costco.
Next question, can you comment on any specific areas in dairy and deli where plant-based is making inroads other than creamers and non-dairy milks?
Great question. Got it from one of our clients we were speaking with yesterday, and my partner in dairy, John Crawford, answered it. So I'll paraphrase him here. Plant-based is getting more shelf space this year in what I'll call cheese. I'll just use cheese as the example because you said plant-based milks and creamers. Plant-based milks and creamers are heavily entrenched in those categories, and plant-based milks and creamers have already innovated several rounds since they first gained shelf space a few years ago. For example, the big trend this year is oat, moving away from soy. In cheese, we haven't even gotten to market parity, and we're certainly seeing plant-based cheese alternatives make more shelf space and do more of a consumer penetration push. Several of the brands, right, are definitely out in the marketplace pushing plant-based cheese as part of the plant-based movement. But I'll answer this question with a bit of insight that I often talk more about with our plant-based meat partners. It's about taste when it comes to plant-based. One of the most important insights that's really important to take away, what's driving plant forward is two things. One is, especially in dairy, or I should say lactose categories, we have a heavy amount of consumers who have either been diagnosed or have recognized themselves as being lactose sensitive or lactose intolerant. So they're actively avoiding lactose in their diet for dietary reasons. And so an option like a lactose-free cheese is going to appeal to them. But they might be absolutely animal eaters in every other part of their lifestyle. So they're going to be about taste and eating experience more so than the fact it doesn't have animals. The other thing to be mindful of is this just going to be a calorie-laden fat bomb as well? The other big trend driving plant-based in the consumer ecosystem is about obviously mindful eating. And a lot of folks, while we've seen some growth in folks who self-report as vegan and vegetarian, that is infinitesimal growth versus the growth we've seen in folks who say, I want to have maybe less animal protein because I kind of hear and feel that that's bad for me. But I'm still eating it. I just maybe would like to try some plant-based options. In that case, again, it's about taste and it's about eating experience. I honestly think that the flavor, variety, and performance of those cheeses and those options is what's going to cause not just trial, but repeat. And so keep that in mind. While there is more vegans today than there maybe were a few years ago, we also in our consumer data see folks try diets like vegan, just like they try diets like keto, but don't stay with it long term and do not always stick to it in every meal occasion. So I'd say while we've seen more shelf space allocated to dairy and deli items that have plant-based outside of milk, I think the staying power of those items will be proven out in how they appeal to consumers long term versus just the shelf space and trial they're seeing this year. Great question. We actually have, Anne Marie and I are doing a plant based webinar coming up that you'll see being published for early August. And look out for that in the IRI and 210 Analytics social channels. We'll be sure, obviously, to talk about it with IDDBA as well. There's much more to the story than thinking Americans are running to plant based. If it doesn't taste good, they're not going to keep buying it. Anything
Next
else?
question.
Mhm.
Yep, next question. Are there certain bread types driving growth?
Ooh, good question. Um, yes, it's about two trends here in bread, and I'm going to say bread is a macro category, right? Perimeter breads is that premium experience. It's about that variety experience. People, again, are taking more breakfast, lunch, and dinners at home, but they don't want to cut corners. So, breads that appeal to their sensibilities and would taste amazing, and honestly aren't just something they could buy anywhere, really driving a lot of growth. And that's why you're seeing dollar growth. I'm actually have a lot of experience in the perimeter bread category from my supplier days. And gosh, this year, anything that I can really showcase or would appeal to a consumer to say this, even just being in the perimeter helps elevate that eating experience. But if you have either a health story or a premium story, tout it, tout it, tout it, because that's what's selling. In sandwich bread, or I should say packaged bread, again, you're seeing a dollar decline versus year over year, but still seeing dollars up in the 2 year trend. And that's because, again, there's two big macro trends happening. One is very much actually about healthful choices. So there's still always going to be a heavy component of the brand or aisle bread category that's about commodity and about dollars and about private label and units and feature ad promotion, just like it's always been. But as you know, there's been a lot of disruption in that category with health forward breads and making you feel like it's permissible to eat bread. And there's a lot of brands with heavy messaging, both from a sustainability side and a feel good social cultural responsibility side, but also from a healthful eating side. And even though those breads might not have, you might look at it as a maker of bread and say, but these full nutritionals and the ingredients and all these things we know in the industry, the consumer sees, hey, I like bread. And all these things in the front are saying, it's okay to eat bread. I'm going to eat that bread. And I'm actually going to spend $2 or $3 more a loaf for it. That's what's driving the bread category. Bread is no longer the devil in a lot of diets also. Certainly carbs are still, folks have just known because everyone who's grown up in the last 25 years has had a fear of carbs put into them by the macro society. But again, the permissibleness of bread, messaging around that on pack in your brand positioning. And I also think on conversely, again, having it be an elevated eating experience. Premium, healthful are really winning when it comes to these categories. Maybe not
Okay,
always in the
next.
same item too, I should clarify. People are buying premium and then they're separately buying permissibility and healthfulness. Great 2 item opportunity.
Okay, next question we received through chat. It looks like it might be several questions in one. What market share does Club have in all retail dollars? Hence, in retail, what is traditional Club? And lastly, online, market share wise and growth in each one.
I happen to have a slide that would well illustrate the food channel share. I actually just pulled it up for today, and this comes from something we published to our clients here at IRI from our IRI panel. So let me orient you all on this if you can still see my screen. This takes a look at our all outlet for total edibles. So that's total food and beverage, both fixed weight and random weight. So I'm outside, I'm in the macro food and beverage world now, not just dairy, deli, bakery. And overall, club is about 14% as of the quarter ending June 27th. 14% of total food and beverage sales are happening at club. And this number, because it's from our panel, does include your Costco as well. Grocery total food and bev is about 48% share. Someone asked about when it includes e-com as well. E-com is only about 10% of total food and beverage. Club is included in that. So keep that in mind. But e-com, probably too long to go into this without graphics. E-com is a slightly different game. It's currently a brick and mortar game when it comes to perishable foods. Club, not so much in that brick and mortar online game, but I know it's really about your big major grocers that are driving that e-com. But overall, food and beverage, we're seeing again 14% coming from club, 48% total food and bev coming from what we call traditional grocery, and then the bigger piece, or the equally big piece, again 25% from your mass and super centers, your Walmarts, your Targets. The real story here, and I'm glad to be able to talk about channel for a minute. Again, total food and beverage, you're seeing 1% more club sales versus what I'll call the pre-pandemic of Q1 2020. The market share of traditional grocery is almost relatively stable. That club growth hurt what I call the more fringe parts of grocery. So health and specialty, which is your Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Sprouts, anything related to that kind of different positioned grocer. Also 7% now in what we call discount grocery, heavily led by your European discounters like Aldi, Lidl, but also a Smart and Final or a really discount shopper food warehouse type, that kind of grocer. That's where a lot of that share growth has usurped. Of course, that's had an impact on traditional grocery, but we're somewhat holding our own. I do happen to have, let me just skip ahead to it. This is produce. Let me find my deli chart for a second. And again, IRI clients, please reach out to your IRI representative. This is available to you. It is published, I believe, also in some of our macro IRI stuff. But here's a look at deli by channel. And again, what you see in Dairy-Deli-Bakery and all of those departments versus total food and bev is bigger lion's share in grocery, traditional grocery, your Albertsons, your Krogers, your Safeways, but also your Bashas and your HEBs. That is 63% of deli. But again, look at that club growth. You're seeing almost more than a share point gained by club in deli. And that is not just prepared foods, rotisserie chickens, but also lunch meats and cheeses. Club is a formidable part of the story now. In fact, club has always, but even increasingly so, generates more sales in deli than even mass and supercenter. I think there's a real story here at the channel level, and I know we're talking with IDDBA about doing some different things in 2022. We know a lot more than we ever have before about fresh foods purchasing in our panel. A lot of innovations coming out there this next year. And there's a lot of a story happening about traditional grocery still gaining and still increasing share. But when it comes to outside of traditional grocery, club is a formidable piece of the competition. Hope that answers the question. Happen to have this up here. Don't really want to kind of go into the e-com piece as much as to say real quick, if you think e-com is going away because the society is more mobile, pause. E-com, what we're hearing from consumers is about 70% of those who tried and bought online for groceries during the pandemic plans to continue to do so in the post-pandemic world. So keep in mind, e-com still formidable, but still a small share of the pie. I have a lot of POV on that, and I'd love to, maybe work with Eric and IDDBA about doing a whole opinion paper or webinar on e-com and fresh. But the big story here is club, really important part of the story when it comes to these categories. Maybe one more question, Eric, because I know we're about 45 minutes past.
One last question, another one through chat. Are you seeing any regional disparities and/or trends when looking at the sales and volume numbers?
Yeah, region and market was a big part of 2020. Anne Marie and I were kind of well published about how there was a direct correlation last summer between sales, especially in things like deli and bakery, and the openness or amount of COVID cases. That was last summer's story. We're not seeing it as much this summer. I'll make a little joke here. The phrase I'm hearing used time and time again in the macro media is this is the hot vax summer. Obviously vaccination rates do vary by market. COVID rates, the new news, the headlines I've been seeing everywhere, right? And I'm sure you have too, is that COVID cases are creeping up in non-vaccinated societies and markets, and even cultural groups, or even families, unfortunately. That'll still have a bit of an impact on people's household purchasing, but at this point, pretty much we're seeing a nationwide return to less restrictions, and people wanting to get back to the new normal. I heard a well-published doctor in say last night on NPR that we could never really return as a society to the full lockdowns we saw, as long as the vaccines are still working. So there isn't a market by market difference that I was seeing like I saw in 2020. That said, I think it's time for us, though, as a community to really understand the market differences, the region differences, about the regional preferences and things that are working in one region that we could take to another region. Before the pandemic, I was talking a lot about how deli was ripe for reinvention because there are so many food trends that are happening in food service and so many food trends that are happening in other aisles, in other regions, that we could take those taste preferences to even other regions, right? We are a much more mobile society. We have moved more than we ever have in the history of the world this past year. So many of you know this. I'm from Chicago. I now live in Phoenix. I love that I'm seeing my local Chicago restaurants and taste palettes show up here in the West. Many people have migrated from cities in the Northeast and in the Midwest into the Southeast and the West. They want to see those food preferences. It's a great limited time regional seasonal offering. That's the story coming out, not so much about societies that are more open or have higher cases being different from other societies. I think it's time for us to return to bringing seasonal and regional flavor trends to all corners of this country. And I think the deli and the bakery and the dairy could be an excellent place to do that. So I'd say, look, I'm not seeing regional differences right now in any of the trends I covered today. It's a pretty good average. There's no one, unlike what we saw last year, there isn't one corner of the country doing differently than the rest. I think it's an opportunity to look at flavor trends, cultural trends, and bring them, to all four corners, as opposed to looking at sales rates differences in the regions.
All right, thank you, Jonna. So on that note, we will go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. On behalf of IDDBA, I'd like to thank Jonna, as always, for joining us and reviewing the monthly report. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I shared with all of you, please check your chat box with a link to the report that we reviewed today. This webinar was also recorded, so the recording will be made available on the IDDBA website, and hopefully we'll have it up within a day or so. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for your continued support of IDDBA. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.